I finished the review. Can I go home now?
Oh no. Not until we take care of that winning streak. Let's see what other book-winning review we can come up with, shall we?
Cassie! Harry Potter.
Well, you have been asking for it and asking for it and asking for it, and so here it is. The Books vs. Movies review of the Harry Potter series, one of the biggest cultural phenomena to come out of the last decade. So I guess I don't really need to go into too much detail about this story, so instead let's talk about how the books and movies are viewed together. Though critical ratings of the films have been pretty consistently high, fans have had a different, often mixed view of the films. The films themselves are a mixed bag, as the series went through 4 directors, 2 screenwriters, 6 directors of photography, 5 film editors, 3 composers, and a partridge in a pear tree. And while the first 2 films are pretty faithful to the original material, the remaining films deviate drastically, alienating a lot of Harry Potter fans. And as you probably already guessed, yes, the books are better. But let's look at specifically why. We'll just get a regular Matt here and we'll get things started. Of course. Pottermore. Yes, I will brew this potion. Oh, hi Hatter, what's up? Harry Potter. Harry Potter, what Harry? Oh, right! Books versus movies. I've been waiting for what the hell? What? Hatter? Jeez, how long have you been on the road? Well, oh, you mean this? Oh, well, I'm Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. What? Or, if you prefer, I'm Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts. What the hell are you doing? It's Halloween, I'm dressing up. Oh. Well, let's start by hang on. You have to dress up too. Do I have to? Yes. Alright, fine. There. Good enough. So let's get started by taking a look at our heroic trio, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger. Even though the series is called Harry Potter, the story is really about these 3, their friendship and how they work together. Let's start by looking at them individually. Harry Potter, of course, is the main protagonist, the person that the entire series revolves around. I mean, his name is in the title of every book. He's fighting battles on several fronts throughout the series. He lost his parents, he has to fight an evil wizard, there are times when the entire wizarding world is against him, and he's growing up. It's no wonder he yells so much in Order of the Phoenix, really. Harry's journey is the ancient story archetype of the hero's journey, so we watch him change dramatically, we see him at his best, and we see him at his worst, and eventually, we get to see him triumph. Movie Harry is portrayed by Daniel Radcliffe, and there's a slight difference in the 2 portrayals. Radcliffe plays Harry, in my opinion, a little more realistically, a little more like a cocky teenager. I mean, Harry has flaws in both versions of the story, but in the book, there's really no indication at all that the fame ever went to his head. And while that's admirable and definitely has merit, the movie version where the fame does go to his head a little bit has merit as well.
She's only interested in you because she thinks you're the chosen one.
But I am the chosen one. Okay, sorry. Kidding.
In the end, he's still the hero, but I think the movie emphasizes a little more that he is, in fact, a kid.
And in the musical, he's played by Darren Criss, who plays him with more of a comic American teenager slant. Despite being a bit of a cad, he's still an all-around likable character.
Cass, we are not adding a Harry Potter musical to the comparison.
Why not? Okay. I'm just trying to get my foot in the door. It's Harry Potter! I should get to talk about it! After all, I am the reason you read it in the first place.
Hatter? Got it.
You haven't seen the last of
Harry's 2 best friends are Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. Ron is the loyal friend who will stand up for Harry no matter what and take on anyone who tries to take him down. Hermione is the friend who keeps him honest and grounded and who he can go to for help and advice. So they both have very different but very meaningful relationships with Harry and very different personalities. Ron tends to be more impulsive and volatile, especially when it comes to being overshadowed by his older brothers and, eventually, Harry himself. But although it does waver at times, his loyalty to his friends and loved ones is clear. Hermione is very intelligent, but somewhat neurotic and insecure, and while she's great at giving advice, she's not always so good at following it. So both of them are complex and interesting characters with very legitimate virtues and flaws. Unfortunately, as most Harry Potter fans are aware, the movies have a tendency to polarize Ron's flaws and Hermione's virtues, with the result being that both of them kind of come off as stereotypes at times, with Ron being the comic sidekick and Hermione being the brainiac who has all the answers. However, one unique experience that this story gave us was the opportunity to watch these characters grow up. In a way, we grew up with them, and the movies also gave us the opportunity to watch the actors grow up. Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson all grew into their acting abilities throughout the series. And it was an interesting experience to watch that. Also, what really makes this trio work is the relationships between them. In particular, the movies put emphasis on the friendship between Harry and Hermione. Now, I realize that Steve Kloves was a Harry-Hermione shipper, and that's largely the reason why the friendship was portrayed the way that it was, but for me, it still works. Platonic male-female friendships aren't portrayed enough in literature and stories, in my opinion, and this is a really good example of one. I love the little moments they get together in the films, like when Harry likes Ginny and Hermione likes Ron, and they both get to share that feeling of what it's like to feel something for someone but not have that feeling reciprocated. And because I know a lot of you are wondering, I didn't have any problem with the dancing scene in Deathly Hallows Part 1. There were no romantic overtones in the scene, it was just a friend trying to cheer another friend up, and it really showed the power of the friendship between them in a much more compelling way than words ever could. But we also have to look at how the trio functions as a whole, and this is where the movies lose out because they skimp on Ron's contribution to the team. Ron is the only member of the trio who was raised in a wizarding family, and so he's the only one who would really know things like what a mudblood is, or why having a werewolf or a giant as a professor is a very bad thing. So early on in the series, that's his role. He is the representative of the wizarding world. Hermione, of course, knows anything that she can read in a book, but for purely social wizarding stuff, they need Ron. And Ron is not unintelligent by any means. Yes, he's often lazy and unmotivated, but he is a strategist, as evidenced by his skill at chess. Ron is very pragmatically minded. He's able to take what he knows, even if he discovers it completely by accident, and use it to his advantage. His forte is not necessarily getting the knowledge, but using what he knows in the simplest way possible. The only times in the movies where we really see the equal contributions of all three members of the trio are the first film, where all three of them have to do something in order to get to the Philosopher's Stone, the fifth film, where Ron shows his true competence in battle, and the seventh film, where Ron destroys the Horcrux and figures out how to get the others. Aside from that, he pretty much just gets reduced to the comic relief sidekick, the result being that the films are not truly about Harry, Ron, and Hermione, they're about Harry and Hermione. And their good friend Ron that they let tag along sometimes. And I wouldn't mind so much if the films weren't so blatant in how unimportant they consider him. I think most Harry Potter fans can agree that the biggest slap in the face was the end of movie 6, where Hermione is telling Harry about how they're gonna come with him and stand by him and destroy all the Horcruxes, and Ron just sits there.
You need us, Harry.
Oh, we can't pass that up. You know what this means, don't you? We're gonna have to make you talk. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
So, yeah, I give the films credit for playing up the friendships, but it's the functioning of the full trio that really drives the story forward, and in that, the book is the clear winner. But this movie gave us one of the worst villains in the world, to say nothing of a whole slew of antagonistic characters. Let's take a look. We've got a lot of people that act against Harry in this series, so let's start at the beginning. The Dursleys. Both versions gave us thoroughly unpleasant, though at times comical people. But the book played up the unpleasantness more, while the movie played up the comedy more. I think I like the movie's portrayal a little bit better because it shows just how laughably ineffectual the Dursleys are at squashing the magic out of Harry. Though admittedly, Dudley never does quite reach the size and weight of a baby killer whale. The next bully that Harry comes across is Draco Malfoy, who makes Dudley seem kind and thoughtful in comparison. He's spoiled, rich, and snobby, and pretty much exemplifies the prejudice against Muggle-born wizards, looking down on anybody that is not of pure blood. But as his character develops and he grows closer to the dark side, he develops from a whiny little brat to a kid who's simply in over his head. He probably echoes what a lot of Death Eaters go through in the early stages, going into it for the glory initially and then finding that being an evil wizard isn't all it's cracked up to be. Unfortunately, in the movies, Draco doesn't get a lot of screen time in the middle of the series. He's barely around in movies 3, 4, and 5, and he's pretty much just a one-dimensional bully. But the screen time that he does get is pure gold, and that's because of the power of the actor who plays him, Tom Felton. We see this especially in movie 6, where Draco has to grapple with his fear of killing Dumbledore versus his fear of being killed by Voldemort. There were a lot of great scenes in this movie especially, as well as in the final two, and as far as I'm concerned, it makes up for his somewhat skimpy showing in the rest of the series. And to be honest, he basically was a one-dimensional bully up until book 6.
In the musical, the character is given the Peter Pan treatment and played by a girl, which actually really seems to fit the character very well, especially when you take into consideration—
Cassie, what did we say?
Oh, fine.
And we can't ignore Jason Isaacs' wonderful performance as Draco's slimy yet cowardly father, Lucius. The actor who plays Quirrell also gave a good performance, adding little touches like not shaking Harry's hand when he first met him. The other Death Eaters, though not mentioned by name individually and just kind of appearing en masse, give us several different levels of evil, everything from rich and diabolical plotters to just stupid henchmen. Helena Bonham Carter's portrayal of Bellatrix Lestrange in particular is kind of reminiscent of the mood swings of a 3-year-old. If she was completely evil and had weapons. However, there is something a bit unsubtle about the villains. I mean, okay, they're not terribly subtle in the books either, but the movie kind of takes it to a whole new level. I mean, are you honestly telling me that the way to tell if a person is good or evil is whether they apparate with white or black smoke? If that's true, then why was it so hard to tell whose side Snape or Sirius was on? It also serves to reduce the complexity of the fight, as if to say that people are either just good or just evil and there's no in between. And as is pointed out at one point during the story, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. Case in point, Dolores Umbridge, the perfectly awful Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher from Harry's 5th year who makes his life a living hell. And quite honestly, she's equally hateful in both versions of the story, prejudiced and spite-filled. I like how in the book she kind of acts as foreshadowing for what's to come with regards to the running of Hogwarts. The movie kind of played up her reign at Hogwarts in more of the comic, let's get the overbearing school marm type of way. But the movie has the performance of Imelda Staunton, and you honestly could not have cast that part more perfectly. Staunton is no stranger to playing bitchy teachers, after all.
Because you know, deep down, you deserve to be punished.
The best you can do is try to get them to obey, to learn discipline.
And then, of course, there's the big one, the Dark Lord himself, Lord Voldemort, or to use his given name, Tom Riddle. In the movies, 4 through 8 anyway, he's played by Ralph Fiennes, who gives a very chilling performance in his sudden movements and mood swings, ranging from cold and detached to murderous and bloodthirsty in a second. I think what I appreciate about his performance in the movies is that he does actually portray some fear and emotion at times, especially in the last film. We see how concerned he is that he doesn't have the Elder Wand, and I like how he seems to get weaker and weaker every time Harry destroys a Horcrux. This shows that he is vulnerable and human, and when he dissolves into nothing at the end, it shows that he was even less than human because of all the damage he had done to his soul. But we have to look at the performances of young Tom Riddle as well. 3 child actors played Riddle as a child, 1 in movie 2 and 2 in movie 6. But honestly, to me, these performances seemed a little bit too cold and inhuman. I mean, the point of showing Tom Riddle's childhood is to show that he was once a child. A loner to be sure, but a child nonetheless, and one who was led to do the deeds that he did by the environment that he grew up in, and not because he was simply evil. And what I missed in his death was the mundane finality, the fact that he was, in the end, just a man. A powerful man, but a man nonetheless.
And the musical actually gives the character some growth, having him realize that his relationship with Quirrell is really—
Cassie!
Oh, come on, tell me you weren't moved when Quirrell and Voldemort ran across the stage to one another.
So, it's kind of a toss-up, with some great characters on one side, but some great performances on the other side. But I think what decides it for me in this round is the portrayal of Severus Snape, Harry's potion professor. And yes, I know he turned out to be a good guy in the end, but he was an antagonistic character throughout the story, acting against Harry and the trio. Book Snape and movie Snape do differ significantly. Snape in the book is bitter and mean-spirited. He often gets angry, and he isn't subtle at all in the favoritism that he shows the Slytherins, particularly Draco, and the spite that he has for Harry and, well, pretty much anyone not in Slytherin. He's a bad teacher and not a particularly good person, even if he does do the right thing in the end. Alan Rickman's portrayal in the movie tends more toward cold and emotionless. Snape in the movie rarely raises his voice, and when he does get angry, it's not the screaming, vein-popping anger of the book, but an anger that's much more quiet and icy cold and a hell of a lot more intimidating. I mean, compare the scenes in the Order of the Phoenix where Harry has discovered Snape's worst secret. In the book, he's yelling and throwing things and firing curses and is probably about ready to kill Harry. In the movie, he isn't nearly as obvious with his anger, but you can tell he wants to throttle this kid.
Your lessons are at an end. Get out.
And the end result for all that is that when you learn about his backstory in the book, you really don't feel much sympathy for the character. I mean, yes, he had a bad life and that's very sad, but in a way he deserved a lot of it and he's still a colossal jerk. Alan Rickman made me feel sorry for this character because throughout the entire series he barely registered an emotion, and the first time that he did show an emotion, it was when he was grieving for the death of Lily. The first emotion he showed was grief. In the book, I simply couldn't see Snape sobbing and crying over Lily's death because of all the horrible things that he had done before. But by toning it down a bit and making this character a lot more subtle, he gave that moment a lot more power and the character a lot more weight. So, by just the slightest little amount, the movie gets the point. Excuse me a minute. Lumos. Much better. But we've barely even scratched the surface here. Let's take a look at other characters. Another difficult category because of the number of good characters in the book and the number of good actors playing them in the movies. Let's start with the students, specifically the secondary trio, Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood. In the books, Neville was introduced as a clumsy and awkward loser of a kid who couldn't get anything right, and throughout the 7 books developed into one of the most badass characters in the series, his own journey paralleling Harry's in many ways. In the movies, he's played by Matt Lewis, who really grew into the part and played it well. Unfortunately, his part was not always written well. He's got some great moments in movies 5, 7, and 8, as well as a couple in movie 1, but other than that, his part is pretty much just reduced to comic relief. This was especially disappointing again in movie 6, after seeing him have such great development in Order of the Phoenix. Ginny Weasley, likewise, is given more weight in the books. She just doesn't show up that much in the movies, to the point that the romance between her and Harry kinda comes out of nowhere. But Bonnie Wright, who played Ginny—
Hold it, Matthew.
What now?
Is that all you're going to say about Neville?
Yeah. I mean, he's a kick-ass character in the books, and he's a kick-ass character in half the movies. What more is there to say?
Are you kidding? It's Neville Longbottom!
Yes, Cassie, but just because you wrote a 20-page research paper about the character does not necessarily mean that he is relevant to this review.
But the fact that I did write a 20-page research paper on the character proves that his character in the book is vastly more interesting than his character in the movie.
But we've already established that.
Oh.
Bye. But Bonnie Wright, who plays Ginny Weasley, does take advantage of the few moments that she has, and it's a decent portrayal of the character. Last in the trio is Luna Lovegood, who basically exists to show us that even in a world where magic and whimsy are real, there are still people who push the limit. Luna kind of acts as the anti-Hermione in a lot of ways. Where Hermione is very logical, but unimaginative and often very narrow-minded, Luna Lovegood believes that anything can be possible and is very imaginative. In the movie, she's played by Evanna Lynch, one of the more perfect casting choices throughout the series. Evanna Lynch very simply is Luna Lovegood. The other child actors are likewise good, even if they don't show up quite as much. But the movies have a habit of well, let's just say it seems that Hogwarts has the ability to breed students. Most notably is the random black kid from movie 3, who read the definition of the grim and the dramatic voice, and then kind of disappeared.
It's among the darkest omens in our world. It's an omen of death.
He doesn't even go here!
Do you even go to this school?
Black could be anywhere.
Okay, go home.
At any rate, on to the adult characters. Professor Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, is the all-knowing wizard who trains Harry and explains everything that happens at the end of each book, even after he's dead. His character gets more interesting the more that we get into the books. In the first 2 films, this character is played by Richard Harris, and in the remainder of the films, Michael Gambon. The result is that the character goes through an abrupt and unexplained change between movies 2 and 3. But, to be fair, this is no fault of the movie. Richard Harris tragically passed away after the filming of the second film and was replaced by Gambon, who played the character a little bit differently. And I may be one of the few Harry Potter fans to say this, but I actually really like his portrayal of the character. It's not really that either one of these portrayals are bad, it's just that Richard Harris showed us more of the wise and mysterious side of Dumbledore, and Michael Gambon shows us more of the youthful and energetic side of Dumbledore. There's really only one moment where Dumbledore is drastically out of character, and that can be chalked up to bad directing rather than bad acting. It might even be said that Harris played the character a little bit too old and Gambon played him a little bit too young, so together they averaged out to the correct age. Unfortunately, though it's no fault of anyone's, it's just one more thing that changed abruptly between movies 2 and 3. And not all the casting choices were brilliant. I was never altogether crazy about David Thewlis's portrayal of Lupin, and his character was definitely more interesting in the books, particularly the last one. And Mad-Eye Moody simply wasn't intimidating in movie 4, being played up more for laughs. And some characters are just eliminated altogether, like Ludo Bagman from movie 4, which meant that they had to cram two very conflicting personalities into one person, Bartimus Crouch, which would have been difficult enough if he'd been played by a competent actor. And some characters are trivialized, like Percy, only showing up once in a while and not getting that story arc that he got in the book. But the bad choices are easily made up by the good ones, and the characters they did choose to keep are, for the most part, done well. Maggie Smith was such a perfect McGonagall that I honestly could not see any other person playing the part. Gary Oldman played a complex and tortured Sirius Black, Emma Thompson played a funny, though sometimes tragic, Trelawney, and Julie Walters played a wonderfully concerned, though often threatening, Molly Weasley. True, not all the casting choices were great, but the ones that were good were very good, lending a lot of weight and depth to the characters. We may not have seen everything that they went to, but the power of the performances showed us a lot more than words could tell us. And the bad choices were either one-timers or they got better over time. It's another tough call, but watching these actors play these parts is one of the more enjoyable aspects of the movie for me, and it's one of the things that drives the story forward. And then there's imagery, the imagination of J.K. Rowling versus the images on the screen. Like I said at the beginning of the review, the Harry Potter films have not had the most consistent production team, but one thing that has remained consistent through all 8 films is Stuart Craig, the set designer, and it really shows. The sets for the movies are consistently wonderful, and they're one of the things that made the first 2 films as successful as they were. When we first saw the Great Hall in the first movie, it was the Great Hall that many of us had imagined. The Ministry of Magic, Malfoy Manor, and even Number 4 Privet Drive are likewise out of the collective imaginations of the fans. The rest of the imagery is likewise good in the movie, creating some great atmosphere for the fans. Which would be nice if it were the same atmosphere. As most fans are aware, there was a huge shift in style and tone between movies 2 and 3 as the series switched directors from Chris Columbus to Alfonso Cuarón. Suddenly the tone was a lot darker and simultaneously a lot goofier, kind of resembling a Tim Burton movie in a lot of ways. And sometimes just being weird for weirdness' sake. I mean, okay, I know that J.K. Rowling actually liked the Shrunken Head from movie 3, but I found him only mildly amusing and mostly annoying. And I'm astounded by the fact that here you've got this scene that involves a giant, violently purple triple-decker bus with beds and chandeliers, and with a driver who drives it so horribly that trees and houses have to jump out of his way, and Cuarón looked at this scene and said, you know, it's just not whimsical enough. Now, the tone of the books does get darker too, but it's more of a gradual process. The story's a little darker in book 3, but not quite as dark as the movie ended up being. And despite it getting progressively darker, that's more because of what's happening in the story rather than the way the story is written. The writing style remains consistently whimsical throughout the entire series, though, to be fair, that's because it was being written consistently by one person. The third movie still looks good, though. Yeah, it's a shift in tone, but the story does get darker there, if maybe not to the degree that the film did. Honestly, I know a lot of Harry Potter fans despise this movie, but I'm actually okay with it. It's not a brilliant film, but it's a decent film, especially looking at the imagery. Mike Newell likewise created a lot of great imagery for movie 4, even if the characterization and the telling of the story leaves something to be desired. And David Yates' dark style of directing is exactly what the series needed at that point, particularly in Order of the Phoenix, which I think balanced out some of the humor as well, even a little bit better than the book did. And the movies still lend images to suit our imaginations, like the Dementors in movie 3, which are still pretty damn creepy. And I like the simplicity of some of the effects and the sheer scope of some of the others. The movies really did present us with a great looking world. But the detail of the descriptions in the books makes the world seem that much more real. And let's face it, some of the special effects in the movies are just there for showing off the special effects. I mean, was a whole sequence of Harry being chased by the dragon really necessary? Did the hedge maze really have to move and try to eat people? Did the burrow really need to explode? My favorite is the archway where Sirius disappears at the end of Order of the Phoenix. In the book, it's just an arch with a veil that flaps around of its own accord. This effect could have very easily been done with a heavy veil and a fan off camera, but instead they opted for a not terribly impressive looking CGI effect. I do appreciate how much detail is in the movies and how real and dark it made the setting. But little things like that really do start to add up after a while, whereas I never got tired of the wonderful descriptions and whimsical style of the books. And now it all comes down to which...
Now, you wouldn't think that a group of sock puppets would be able to tell the story effectively. But really, this style of imagery takes the story places that you wouldn't expect. The simplicity of the sets and the characters underlies the... Well, are you gonna interrupt me, or what?
No, I'm curious to see where you're gonna go with this, Cass. Please, continue.
Well, the... Oh, shut up!
Though we're comparing the whole series as a whole, I think it's important to look at each story individually as well. The first two movies were incredibly faithful to the book, sometimes even line for line, and in Sorcerer's Stone at least, I feel like it told the story even a little bit more coherently. The acting is sometimes a little bit over the top from the kids, to say nothing of the sudden voice changes in movie 2, but in general, pretty solid, and as good as the original books, if not better. Though, the Chamber of Secrets movie, in my opinion, has a few too many cliches for my taste. Some of the lines that were added or changed were obviously written to create a moment, and it often comes off as forced. Because it is forced. Though, admittedly, movie 2 does have one of the funniest lines in the series.
Why couldn't we follow the butterflies?
Movies 3 and 4 are really where the series took a dive, and like I said before, I really don't hate movie 3 as much as a lot of people do, but you can definitely see the jarring change of style. I mean, I loved Alfonso Cuarón's direction in Little Princess, but it just never felt like I was watching a Harry Potter movie. Plus, Prisoner of Azkaban is my favorite book of the series, so maybe I'm biased a little bit. Movie 4 is just bad, relying tools and special effects and not enough on character development and coherent storytelling. In general, while the first two films are very plot-driven, movies 3 and 4 seem to be effect and atmosphere-driven. The result being that while we get some very nice-looking films, we don't get much in the way of character development and storytelling. Order of the Phoenix, however, is one movie that I would definitely argue is better than the original book, if for no other reason than that they managed to take the longest book of the series and make it into the shortest movie of the series. This is the only movie screenplay that was not written by Steve Kloves, and screenwriter Michael Goldenberg did what should have been done with the movies all along. Rather than the cut-and-paste style of adaptation that we get from the other movies, what we get here is, in many ways, a different story, but a good one, and one that still reflects the original tone of the book. We also don't spend half the story wanting to give Harry a good smack upside the head. Movie 6 was also done well overall, but you could definitely see the return of the old habits of the series. Like shoving characters like Ron and Neville, who got such strong development in the previous movie, back into their standard comic relief role. Plus, I was never happy with the way that they handled the Harry-Ginny romance. There's one scene that makes absolutely no sense, even within the context of the movies, and the ending just felt far too rushed. The trouble with David Yates' direction is that what he does well, he does extremely well, but what he screws up, he monumentally screws up, and you can definitely see that with this movie. Half-Blood Prince made a decent film, but in my opinion, it's one of the best books of the series, if not the best. Which leaves us with Deathly Hallows, split into two movies for the sake of telling a better, more faithful story. The question is, was this necessary? Well, too much happens in the Harry Potter story that it almost reads like more than one book. I mean, really, if you think about it, the last two books were basically a 3-act story all their own, so in a way, it does make sense to split them up like this. And yeah, the movies were great. They were very, very well done, telling a faithful adaptation of the story while still adding some unique touches of their own. The characters were well developed, the action and visuals were great, and the story was very engaging. I like, for example, that we actually get to see Hermione destroy her Horcrux, and that Voldemort seems to get weaker and weaker every time Harry destroys a Horcrux. The Battle of Hogwarts in particular is the stuff that cinematic dreams are made of. And the way that the movies give us the various backstories, like Snape's story and the story of the Peverell brothers, is especially creative and compelling. Which is not to say that the movies don't have issues as well. I was never terribly happy with the ending where Harry finally defeats Voldemort. While the bulk of the battle is good, the ending portion after Harry has come back from the dead goes on a bit too long, and again, it's driven more by visuals than by intellect. And yes, I know, it's a movie, but the assumption that moviegoers need to have constant eye candy is something that irritates me a little bit. We've had our big visually exciting climax, so we can sit through a little dialogue. Also, no one was around when Harry actually killed Voldemort, so how did that scene afterwards go?
You rotten Death Eater! I'll show you! Look how much bigger my one is than yours!
You,
and it's got an orb! Voldemort's dead, I killed him. Really?
The Dark
You killed
Lord's
him?
dead?
Yeah, just now.
That's great, Harry! Where's the body?
Well, there isn't exactly a body. He kind of dissolved into this sort of burned paper type stuff, and if you can still kind of see some. No, it's gone now. But it was. I swear, I killed him. He's gone. He stopped fighting now. We won. Heh. What? Look, I know it's hard to believe, but like he threw Avada Kedavra at me, and I threw Expelliarmus at him, and our wands connected in that wands connecting effect that David Yates likes really too much, and then I forced it back at him, and he died. I'm not making this up.
But these are very minor things. Ultimately, the reason why books win this round, and the reason why the books are better than the movies in general, is a matter of consistency. The trouble with some of the later movies especially is that they have to play these games of 20 plot points in 10 seconds so that we get caught up on the things that are important for this movie, but we weren't aware were going to be important in the earlier movies where they were important. Don't try to diagram that sentence. What I'm trying to say is they really should have waited until all the books were released before they started on the movies. I mean, you can't really blame them. No one knew that the plot was going to be as intricate as it ended up being, and no one knew that Rowling was setting things up in book 1 that wouldn't come to full fruition until book 7. But it does mean that the plot points in later movies are often rushed and sloppily done. And the inconsistent tone of the movies also makes for a somewhat jarring viewing experience. On the one hand, Cuarón probably should have directed the third film a little bit closer in consistency to the other two films. I mean, he did set a pretty bad precedent. But on the other hand, maybe Columbus didn't do the series justice by staying so faithful in the first two films. Especially because the other movies couldn't be that faithful with the plots becoming so complex. Which led to a lot of cut and paste style of adaptation. At any rate, while the movies were overall done well, with one notable exception, the books tell us the intricate, well-paced, and timeless story that we fell in love with. So, unsurprisingly, the best version of this story can be found in the books. And that about does it for this book.
Wait a minute!
What, Cassie?
Aren't you going to talk about how 17-year-old Harry traveled back in time to find 14-year-old Harry and start a rock band?
No.
Or the version where everybody had sex with everybody else?
Boy, you're really desperate, aren't you?
By golly, I'll teach you to exclude me from a Harry Potter review! Expel a reviewist! I'll take over this review yet.